לא תבושי ולא תקמי, מה תשתוקי ומה תהי, מה יתלסו עניי עמי ונבנתה עיר עתילה לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. בואי בשלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני הסגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה, תנינה נאי 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 לך דודי, תנינה נאי 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 לקראת כלה, תנינה נאי 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 פני שבת, תנינה נאי 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 מקבלה, נאי נאי נאי
Da 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 ya da 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 da. Whoo! Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. It's a Thursday night. We've come out of Tisha B'Av. We came out of a 25-hour fast. We broke the fast. Nina had some beautiful bagels and cream cheese and lox. Feeling good. I've got something so awesome to share with you. Really beautiful teachings. Let us light up the darkness. Who's in the house with us on this post-Tisha B'Av AT Daily? Bill Eldridge from Berkeley. This sounds like it's going to be a fascinating daf, I can promise. Malik Wahid Wazir says G. Christo Cheney says Shalom from Lubbock, Texas. I hope you and Nina had a meaningful Tisha B'Av. We certainly did. Anybody who was with us today when we read the Book of Lamentations, and I think you were, Christo, it was very powerful, very moving. Nina really fulfilled the mitzvah of crying for the loss of the temple. My eyes got wet, but I didn't quite get there. But I did put myself in that story, and it's so painful. And we have to realize what we've lost so that we get some inkling of where we're headed when the Messianic age comes and that third temple is rebuilt. Melissa Eitel-Jurin says shalom and good evening from Great Neck, New York. Randy Lieberman Herman says shalom from Florida. Joy Lynn is with us from New Jersey. Stephen Frank from St. Louis says shalom. Sandy McMurray is with us from Michigan. Lucas Ashby is with us from Houston. Pauline Michael says shalom from Arkansas. Krista says, yes, sir. I made sure I tuned in for the reading. And Harold Black says Loretta and Harold are with us from Roseburg, Oregon. Marjorie Holler is with us. She says, okay, now you made me hungry in Georgia, and it is after midnight. Lynn is with us from Texas, and Gwen is in the house with us as well. All right, let's get into it. We've got a lot of great stuff, and I'm going to be showing you a video that's going to knock your socks off tonight. But I will say at the outset, excuse me, that when they destroyed the temple, particularly the second temple, when the Romans destroyed the temple on the 9th of Av, so now we're in the 10th of Av, we've come out of Tisha B'Av, but it burned. It burned all through the next day. And so that's why we don't get quite into, we don't come quite out of Tisha B'Av so quick. Normally we wouldn't eat meat, for example, until afternoon tomorrow. That's why we broke our fast with bagels and not with a nice meat dinner. Much more of a simple dinner. Nevertheless, because we're heading into Shabbos, we can come out of Tisha B'Av quicker a little bit. So, for example, tomorrow morning I can shave, which I've been looking forward to doing all through these 3 weeks. And I don't have to wait until the afternoon to shave. I can shave in the morning because I'm getting ready for Shabbos. Now that we're talking a little bit about Tisha B'Av, yesterday I told you the story of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. This is one of the stories written in the Talmud around in Tractate Gittin, about page 55b it begins. And you probably heard it before. You heard it from me yesterday. I won't review the whole story. But suffice it to say that the host of a party wanted his friend Kamtza to come to the party, a party for the VIPs of Jerusalem that included the sages, not his enemy, Bar Kamtza. And Bar Kamtza was, in fact, the son of Kamtza. So this man has a dear friend who's friends with all the sages. And his enemy is this man, Bar Kamtza. The servant who goes to make the invitation, by mistake, brings Bar Kamtza. Bar Kamtza's at the party. And then we go through the story the way we've normally heard it, that Bar Kamtza begs not to be humiliated, not to be thrown out, offers to pay for even the cost of the party, even the whole cost of the party. Nevertheless, the host throws him out. And the man says to himself, the sages saw this behavior, they approved it. This whole Jewish enterprise with its sages and its rules and its Torah, it's all garbage. It should come down. And he goes to the Roman emperor and says that the Jews are rising up against you. They're planning a rebellion against Rome. He creates a proof for the Romans by bringing an offering from the emperor, which he damages on the way to Jerusalem in a way that makes it blemished by Jewish law, but unblemished in the Roman law of offerings. And so when the priests will not offer it on the temple, this serves as a proof that, yes, indeed, the Jews are causing sedition and want to rise up against Rome. And the war with the Jews follows, and eventually the destruction of the temple. What I want to add to that today, and Nina helped me see it through a teaching of Rabbi Avigdor Miller of blessed memory. And I said yesterday, we don't know what was between the host and Bar Kamtza and why he hated him so much. We just don't know, and I didn't want to judge the host without knowing that. But we do know a few things about Bar Kamtza. We do know that he's willing to sell out. He's a Jew, and he's willing to sell out the whole Jewish people because he was ostensibly humiliated at a party. No matter how terrible that behavior was, no matter how wrong it was to humiliate him, it can't be the right answer to sell out the whole Jewish people and eventually cause armies from Rome to come and literally kill millions of Jews. So who was this man? He was already an informer. He was already someone who had not only turned his back on Judaism and said it wasn't for him, he was somebody who said he knows better. We have a more modern, scientific, philosophically sound way to look at life than this silly, superstitious faith of my ancestors. These sages are all corrupt. This religion is for the dogs. It's all nonsense. And he was living this kind of, modern lifestyle. And in order to get ahead with his cronies in the court of King Herod and the other ones kissing butt of the Romans, he wanted to bring information about the sages. This was already known, and this is why he was not welcome at that party. They knew that he was there to hear what the sages say, because of course the sages would talk among themselves and say how awful it is that we're not free to practice our religion as we would like because of the Roman imperialism. That what the Romans bring to us is difficult, and we saw that in the whole story of Shimon Bar Yochai, how he ends up hiding in a cave because he said that everything that the Romans built they do for themselves and not for the people that they rule over, not for the people that they colonize, like our land. Well, he wanted to get that kind of juice on the sages and their friends. The host certainly didn't want him there, and so threw him out. The question then becomes, if that is so, if this was somebody who really was low and malicious and dangerous, and who probably should have been killed when the sages thought about maybe we should just kill this guy Bar Kamtza, he's so dangerous. He's so dangerous to the whole people. He's like a traitor in wartime. The question is, why is that story included in the Talmud? Why is it used, as it usually is, to teach that we must never humiliate anybody, and it's better to jump into a furnace than to humiliate anybody, meaning anybody, even this guy who is so low and evil and dangerous? And I think that a lesson that we can take from it, we who are privileged, right? If you're here with me now, you're enjoying the privilege of being connected to the tradition, of being connected to God, of being a person of faith, or at least one who is open to faith. And that is a privilege, my friends. And we are surrounded today by people who not only turn their backs on faith, but who mock it, who ridicule it, who put it down, who call it names and slander it and say that faith is dangerous and it is that the cause of so many evils in the world, etc. And they can be so harsh on us. And in the name of their principles and their atheism or whatever they want to say, to mock people of faith, in the name of that principle that they hold so dear to them, they can be so dangerous to us and so dangerous to what we believe in with all our hearts. Even when they act that way, we have to protect ourselves. We have to be smart, but we have to be classy. We have to be classy. We have to be consistent, and we have to be classy. It's not about turning the other cheek. That's not a teaching that comes out of this. But what it is about is being consistent, being moral, being open. And when one of them comes to us and wants to debate and wants to argue and really wants to just show how smart they are and put us down, that actually is an opening. And in that moment, even if they're not really there to listen, even if they're not really open to debate, even if it's not a true dialogue, we have to conduct ourselves by answering to a higher authority. And if we do that and we're consistent with it, they may even say, you know what, maybe I've got this thing wrong. Maybe I'm turning my back on something that I don't understand. Maybe religion isn't a superstitious of the simple. Maybe there's truly gifted, intellectually gifted people who make a life of faith. And in turning my back on them, maybe I'm missing something. And we'll have a chance to connect with those people because we've conducted ourselves consistently in a classy manner, and that we would never humiliate someone publicly. There was probably a better way to make sure that Bar Kamtza was not exposed to whatever the private conversation of the sages was going to be without causing that scene. And so I think our sages, who knew very well what sort of a man Bar Kamtza was and expected the readers of the Mishna and of the Gemara to also understand, they included that story in the Talmud to teach us that even one, such as Bar Kamtza, needs to be treated with a manner of class and respect befitting of us as people of faith. And I want to say, if you look, I don't know if you guys look around my office here when I'm talking, when I share with you a Talmud every day on AT Daily, perhaps you've looked around a little bit. So one of the things that's hanging in my office are my degrees, my university degrees. As a film director, that's not really something you need to hang on your wall, right? When you're a doctor, when you're a lawyer, it makes sense that you have your degrees on your wall. When you're a film director, when you're an accidental Talmudist, how important is it really? And for years and years and years, they just sat in a closet. They were not hanging on my wall for many, many years. But then I thought, you know what? I think it is important. I think it is important that people know that I, Sal Litvak, who am totally dedicated to growing and learning as a Jew, as a man of faith, I didn't have that yeshiva education, and I consider myself, just a little bit above an ignoramus because I lacked, a really big, good yeshiva Jewish education when I was young. But I'm not an ignoramus generally. There's a Harvard College degree there. There's an NYU Law School degree there. There's a UCLA Film School Master in Fine Arts. I'm a pretty educated, pretty worldly lawyer, director, and I was also quite a bon vivant, adventurer, pursuer of knowledge from all corners of the universe. But in all my learning and in all my studies and all my travels and all my adventuring, I really never found anything so fulfilling and so spiritually and intellectually satisfying as the tradition that I'm teaching you every day now. And I think is worth saying. All right. Let us get back to where we are. We are holding on page 146. That's Kuf Mem Vav. We are in chapter 22, and we're going to open and finish, with God's help, discussion of Mishnah number 3 of chapter 22 tonight, and begin our discussion of Mishnah number 4. And I'm promising you something exciting and fun. All right, so Mishnah number 3 is all about barrels as they existed in the Talmudic time. A barrel back then, looks like that. And it is made out of clay. And by the way, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the comments. And toward the end, Nina will feed them to me and I'll answer as many as I can. So a barrel, when we've been talking, and we've talked quite a bit about that a barrel of wine on Shabbos can become a base for a muktzah item, a rock that was left on a barrel. Now we can't move the barrel because it's become a base for this muktzah item, a set-aside item that's not prepared for use on Shabbos. There's no use for a rock, but we could shake the barrel so that the rock falls off, and then we can pick up the barrel and take it where we're going. And I've been thinking about a wooden barrel because, in 2020, when we say the word barrel, maybe we think of a wooden barrel or an oil drum, a tin drum. But since back then they wouldn't have done that, I was thinking wooden barrel. But no, it's not a wooden barrel. It's a clay barrel. So it's much better for us to think a jug, a big clay jug. And that's what we're talking about today. If you have a big clay jug of wine and you want to open it on Shabbos. So we may not break a clay barrel on Shabbos. Now here we're talking about probably an empty one. If we have an empty barrel, we might be tempted to just break it because we could use the big pieces that result from the breaking as plates. They could actually do that. These jugs, they probably didn't get reused. They were often smashed after one use. Or maybe they were a little bit broken and then they would just smash it. And if you had a lot of people, unexpected guests, you could easily just break apart that jug and now serve food on these big pieces of clay. You can't do that on Shabbos because you would be creating a new vessel, right? That new plate that would come out of the pieces of the barrel, you'd be creating that on Shabbos, not permitted. Now let's talk about a jug of wine. Now, let's say that it's brand new, or you drank half of it, maybe last Shabbos, and then you sealed the opening, right? You sealed it. Maybe you sealed it with wax after Shabbos. You can't seal an opening of a clay barrel, as we learned in this Mishnah, with wax on Shabbos because you'd smooth the wax, and that's actually the prohibited labor of smoothing. But now, let's just say it's sealed, and you want to open it. Now, the normal thing would be just peel off the wax or peel off whatever is sealing that. Maybe it was even sealed with mud or with clay, and it's a much harder type of seal over the opening. Well, what is permitted and what is not? If that barrel is plugged, so that wine barrel is plugged, Rabbi Yehuda says that you can't perforate the plug. So if instead of taking off the whole plug, which maybe would be a big opening, maybe you only wanted to make a little opening because you're only going to pour a couple of glasses, Rabbi Yehuda says you can't perforate whatever is plugging the opening of the clay barrel. But the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, and they say we may. We're not creating a new opening. As we're going to learn, that's what's prohibited. You can't make a new opening in the clay barrel, but perforating the plug, even though you're making a new hole in whatever material is creating the plug around the opening, you're only making a hole into what is already the opening of the clay jar. So the rabbis are going to permit perforating the opening. That's okay. But what we may not do is make a perforation in the side of the plug, because that really would be considered a new opening. Now you're talking about some kind of a jar, right? That like this is the jar and this is the opening, like the neck of the jar, right? And you can even sort of see that in this picture. So it has a neck. So if they made a hole in the side of the neck, even though you'd be perforating the plug because the plug covers that whole neck, it would be a new opening in the jar, and we can't make a new opening in the jar. Now here's where it gets fun. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, so that's the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, the head of the sages, says, on Shabbos, we may bring out a sword and lop the opening, lop the neck, lop the top, just cut the top right off the jar. It's like making a big presentation. Nina, if you're watching, please bring me the machete. And you could just cut the top right off the clay jar. Why would the homeowner do that? To make a show for his guests. What kind of a show? A show of generosity. Hey, we're going to have a good time. I'm cutting the top off the jug. That's not a new opening, right? That's just the neck over the opening. I'm cutting it off because I'm saying we're not going to seal this jar up again tonight. We're going to drink all the wine that is in the barrel. That is going to be permitted. I was very happy to hear this teaching, and I'll tell you why. Here at the Litvak House, for years, we have been opening champagne with a saber. We actually use a machete, but it's actually a wonderful old story that Napoleon, here we go. That's the one. Thank you so much. This is the Litvak machete. Napoleon went to boarding school in France with the grandson of Moet, right? Moet, I guess it would be pronounced, the Champagne, famous champagne family in France. It was already a big established brand of champagne. And the grandson of the champagne czar, the champagne baron, let's say, of France, went to school with Napoleon. They were friends, they were chums. And once they left school, so the grandson went to help run the champagne business, and Napoleon went into the army and had a pretty distinguished career in the army. And early on in his, as he became an officer and started to command more and more men, he developed a tradition that on the night before a battle, they would open champagne with their sabers. They wouldn't just pop the cork, they would lop off the top of the champagne bottle. And they had a tradition that if it came off clean, that was a good omen, like that the person who did it was going to survive the next day's battle. But if it came off jagged, if it left a jagged opening on the champagne bottle, that meant that they had to open another bottle of champagne. And we have been sabering our champagne for years. I thought about doing it in here in this room. It just really wouldn't make sense. But luckily, I was able to find a video of my good friend Josh Silver, who was at our house on New Year's Day 11 years ago. This is an 11-year-old video. And I always like to teach people how to saber champagne. And so that you can see what this looks like, here we go. Look, do I have volume here? Hold on a second. Why is it? Oh, here. Okay, hold on. Yes, my friends.
I feel like I want to go to Disneyland.
That is how you saber a bottle of champagne. If you're interested, maybe if people message me and that they really want to see this, I'll make an explanatory video how to saber a bottle of champagne. It's actually very easy if you have the right technique. It's super fun to do. It definitely makes a big show for your friends. It definitely says to your friends, we're going to drink this whole bottle of champagne. Thank God there is kosher champagne. So this whole thing is very possible, very doable. And now I have learned, because of today's daf and the lesson of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, that I can do this on Shabbos. I had no idea that I could do this on Shabbos. But it makes sense. I mean, all we're doing is opening a bottle of champagne. Now, the machete would certainly be muktzah. This is meant for what? For yard work, for cutting bamboo, for cutting through a forest, for cutting down extra growth in your garden. This is not permitted for that kind of work is certainly not permitted on Shabbos. You can't cut anything off a living plant. That would be like harvesting, reaping. You can't do that. So this is a muktzah item that we could certainly not touch. We would not touch it on Shabbos unless, as we've learned, we needed the place where it was sitting. So then we would pick it up in an irregular way, maybe with the left hand or the back of the hand to move it from that spot. Or if we needed the machete for a permitted labor, not what it is designed for, but something that it can do, which is permitted on Shabbos. And in this case, opening the bottle of champagne. By the way, we use the back of the blade because we hit it in exactly the right point where the lip meets the seams of the bottle. I'll make a video about it if people are interested. Anyway, isn't that fun? You can saber champagne on Shabbos. All right, let's move on. But, say the sages, while you can use a sword to lop off the top of the wine jug on Shabbos, excuse me, you cannot use a spear. Now, the spear is muktzah for the same reason. It's a weapon, right? They talk about, I use a machete, they use a sword. So a sword is muktzah because it's a weapon, right? We don't use a weapon on Shabbos. We don't use a sword or a spear. The sword may be used to chop off the top of the wine jug. Why not the spear? Because the spear is not being used to chop off the top of the jug. The spear would be used to smash a hole into the side of this clay jug. Clay is a little different than glass. If I did that with a glass bottle, obviously the whole thing would shatter. But you could make a hole in a thin clay jug. That is prohibited because we cannot make another hole, an additional opening. That would be forbidden labor because now it's like we're finishing the object by turning it into a different object. A wine jug with two openings is a different object than with one opening. Can we add to an existing opening? There's a dispute about that, but we definitely are not permitted to add a new opening into the wine jug. And we learned that from the chicken coop. Likewise, we can't make a new opening on Shabbos in the chicken coop. Okay. We also learned, let's go on, we'll go fast now, we'll get to the questions. We may not cut a reed. So a reed, imagine, some kind of like bamboo-like plant, a reed that's hollow in the center. So first of all, we can't cut it if it's like growing. We can't cut down a reed because we can't cut something we can't harvest on Shabbos. Let's say we've got a long reed and it's hollow inside. And we wanted to use it to suck wine out of the jar. We wanted just to take out a little, and then we're going to draw it out with suction. Now, what we cannot do is let's say we have a very long reed and we want to cut it in half. We can't cut that reed in half because now we're creating a new utensil, right? Cutting it in half to make the utensil that we need is, in effect, creating a new utensil on Shabbos. It's manufacturing. We can't do it. If there was a reed that was already cut to the right size and it was inserted in the wine jug, we could use it to suck out some of the wine, to draw out some of the wine. The question is, if we have a reed that's cut to the right size, can we insert it into the wine jug? Is that permitted? The concern would be, and Rav says no. Rav says you cannot insert a reed into the wine jug, because if we know that we can use reeds in that way, we might come to cut one to size, and then we would violate the prohibition on creating that new utensil. But Shmuel says, yes, if you've got a reed that's sitting around that's the right size, you can insert it into the jug, and we're not concerned that that's going to lead you to, in the future, come to cut new reeds. On the question of, can we take a myrtle leaf and insert it in the mouth of the jug to form a spout so that we can direct the pour perhaps into a smaller glass, or it helps us to control the flow. Now, we said that you can take an existing reed if it's already cut to the right length, and we can insert it in the jug, and we can draw out wine with that. But can we insert this myrtle leaf into the opening so that we can use it to pour like a spout? And here, though there was a dispute among the sages, in the end they ruled that no, We cannot insert a leaf into the mouth to make a spout because we may come to create an actual spout on Shabbos, or because we may come to cut leaves, because this is actually so useful a tool that we cannot do that. We can't insert the myrtle leaf, even if it's already cut. Then comes the question of, it seems like a totally unrelated question, but it's so interesting. So let's say that we're going to have a bunch of people sitting around learning on Shabbos. We don't want to be sitting on the ground. We don't have cushions, but at least it would be good if we were sitting on something that was, not the ground itself. So let's say that we had some felt available, some soft felt, only it's inside and we're outside. There's no Eruv, we're in the public domain. They can't bring it out to us from the private domain indoors. But because these pieces of cloth, this soft felt, could actually be wrapped around somebody's shoulders so they can bring it out, right? They can wear it as an article of clothing and then bring it to the place where they want people to sit on it. It can be transported in that way. Felt can work as a seat or as a cloak, and so it's okay, it's permitted to wear it, to wear it as a garment, because you can wear things, you just can't carry things, to bring it to the place where people will sit on it. Hard felt, stiff felt, which nobody would ever wear as a cloak, cannot be brought out from the house in this situation, because anyone would look at it and say, that's not a cloak. He's just carrying what's going to be a seat on his shoulder. And he's pretending that it's a cloak, but it's not. So everyone agrees that you can wear soft felt to bring it out to use as a seat, and you cannot wear stiff felt, hard felt, to bring it out to use as a seat. And where they disagree is on medium felt. It sounds like the mama bear, the papa bear, and the baby bear. But with regard to medium felt, they had a dispute, and basically they said that Rav does not allow it, and Shmuel does allow it. But we learn that the reason they thought that was because of a mistake in their reasoning. Rav did permit it. The reason they thought that Rav did not permit, that he prohibited them to bring out this medium felt by wearing it as a cloak, is because of an actual incident that happened. They were having a learning session outside. Rav was a very prominent sage, and they didn't want him sitting on the ground. And so some of the younger students brought out pieces of felt by wearing them, medium stiffness felt, for him to sit on. And when they brought it to him, he refused to sit on it. So people assumed that Rav held that you can't wear medium stiffness felt to wear it, to pretend to wear it as a cloak in order to bring it out so somebody could sit on it. But that's not why he refused to sit on it. The reason that Rav said, no, I can't sit on that, is because also present were his colleagues, Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi. Now, Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi were younger than him. So they were sort of colleague/disciples. And that's why the even younger students thought, we're just going to honor the most senior one. We only have enough felt for one person, so we'll bring it out for Rav. But Rav didn't want to be exalted or elevated in any way above his colleagues, Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi. Asi or Ashi? I just want to make sure I'm getting it right. Sorry. Asi, Rav Asi. So Rav did not want to in any way be exalted or elevated above his colleagues, Rav Kahana and Rav Asi. He thought that would be inappropriate. He didn't explain that. He just declined to sit on the felt. And so it's very important to understand that, when we seek to emulate our sages and to conduct ourselves halachically the way they do, we got to make sure that we understand what they're doing. and sometimes we may read into a situation motivation and behavior that is not there. And if that's so with our sages, how much more with just people around us that we think we understand what they're doing and we judge them critically and we don't really know what's going on. I mean, what a wonderful lesson there. To finish up, we'll open our discussion of Mishnah number 4, and we'll continue it tomorrow at about noon Pacific because it's Friday. But Mishnah number 4 includes a teaching that if you're walking on the road and your garments fall into a puddle of water and get soaked, right? Let's say your coat, for whatever reason, your coat got soaked. Your cloak, your outer cloak got soaked. So can you put it back on your body? Are we concerned that you might wring it out when you put it back on your body? Because you can't wring liquid out of a garment on Shabbos. Are we concerned that it might look like laundering, that he's wearing something wet on Shabbos and maybe he cleaned it and that's why it's so wet? There's a possible appearance of impropriety here. So the sages say, no, we're not concerned about that. He can put it on his body, and then what he should do is he should walk to where he's going, and when he gets home or to his friend's house, and where there's an outer courtyard where it's safe to do so and private, not in view of the masses, there he can take off his wet garment and spread it out in the sun and let the sun dry it. Of course, he can't be wringing it. He can't be smoothing it. He can't be trying to iron it out, but he could just spread it out in the sun so that it should dry. Now, the issue here is that he's doing that out of view. He may not do that if masses of people are around, right? If the public is going to see him do this, then it looks too much like laundering, and he's not permitted to do that. But if it's in private, once he gets to that courtyard, then he can spread it out in the sun. And then we learn that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar do not permit that. They prohibit him to do that. And so, in fact, even though this halacha is taught in the Mishna, as this is the permitted, the correct way to behave, the sages of the Gemara, the later sages, right, the Amoraim, who are commenting on the behavior and teachings of the Tanaim, they ruled that this would be prohibited. Who would rule? Rav Yehuda said this in the name of Rav. Rav said that this would be prohibited. Why? Because anything that is prohibited on account of the appearance of impropriety in front of others, Rav said, we're going to take a precedent from this particular Mishnah, learn from Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar who prohibit this, and teach that anything you're prohibited to do in public because of the possible appearance of impropriety, you're also going to be prohibited to do it in private. And that becomes a general principle. And that's why the halacha changed. And here the sages of the Gemara, very rare, overruled what the majority had said of the sages in the Mishnah. But they didn't make up the teaching. They just used as a precedent the prohibition of Elazar and Shimon. And it makes sense. Because if we have things that we understand that if others watch us doing it, even though we're not violating a Torah law, it might look like we're violating a Torah law. And so we don't do it because we don't want people to think that we're ignorant. We don't want people to think that we're breaking the law. And we don't want them to make a mistake and learn from us and think that make a mistake of what they think we're doing and then come to use it as a permission for them to go and actually violate that Torah law. We don't want any of that to happen. So, since we can't do that in front of others, they said you can't do it in private either, lest you train yourself to have one course of conduct in public and another course of conduct in private. And that is a dangerous state of affairs for many reasons. In fact, I just saw a teaching today. Ali Ansfield shared it on JTV on Instagram that said, I forget who he was quoting, but he said you can really tell a person's moral fiber, not from the way they behave in public, but from the way they behave in private. And that's a related teaching to what we're saying here. So anything that's prohibited in public because of appearance of impropriety is also prohibited in private. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let me check your comments and questions. Oh, there's a few. Bill Eldridge says, to borrow a line from my own religious tradition, it is necessary to be able to offer an account for the faith that is within us. As such, if we believe that all are made in the image of the everlasting, then we are obliged, dutiful to that faith, to respect that dignity without question. Beautiful, beautiful, Bill. Thank you for sharing that teaching from your faith and your tradition. Love it. David Shafir, I know exactly what you were talking about when you say that Talmud gives an incredible joy to the learner. I had been ultra-Orthodox for many years before losing faith 10 years ago. The void that I've been carrying within since then is huge and impossible to explain to somebody who didn't have that experience. you are very lucky. David, the text, the learning, it's all waiting for you. The door is open. You're welcome anytime. And whatever you walked away from, you probably had good, heartfelt, and wise reasons. And as somebody says, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. The religion that you don't care for, I don't care for either. But thank God there are so many doors in this house, and you're so free to walk in one of the other doors than the one you walked out. Note, it wasn't a kosher bottle of champagne in that video. No, that was 11 years ago. That was another time in another life. Brian of Bloomfield, a good yeshiva education is potentially worthless if you stop learning Torah after grade 12, as many of us do. Those lucky enough to be inspired to learn as adults bring a fresh perspective, breathe new life into the holy teaching and the holy learning. Amen, Brian, and thank God you're here and part of this learning community. PK Sakara says, please make a video that shows us how to open the champagne. All right, I'll make an explanatory video, how to saber a bottle of champagne. Just give me a little bit of time, I'll make that happen with God's help. Lynn says, degrees, bravo. It is important that Hashem gets public credit for all our divergent callings, talents, and accomplishments. Hashem's is the world and its fullness. Amen. There's nothing wrong with the academies. There's nothing wrong with the universities of the world. There's so much wisdom contained therein. These days there's, we hear some troubling news, let us say, out of the American university, the universities of America. But what makes the news and the troubles that we're talking about, that's not all of what's going on there. And there's beautiful wisdom to be garnered there. Where I object is where people, who look like respected elders take a mocking attitude, a dismissive attitude toward faith. When faith is derided as simplistic, that's done by somebody who hasn't studied it and has no idea how sophisticated and lengthy and vast is that intellectual tradition in our teachings. And finally, Barbara Bell, with all respect, listening to this makes it quite clear to me why the Jewish people are considered to be great businessmen. If you can follow this many rules and still accomplish your goals, you should receive the gifts of the universe. I mean, look, I think there's many reasons, and there's many other peoples and groups of people that do fantastically well in business and every other endeavor. The Jews are a very small group and have managed to make a very big impact in the worlds not only of business, but of science, of music, sports, arguable. We're not so big or so coordinated. And yet, Sandy Koufax, perhaps the greatest pitcher in baseball history. Jews have been able to contribute to every field. And it's unclear why. It's really unclear why. But when we speculate, and we don't know, but when we speculate, it may have been a terrible benefit to us that we've been persecuted so harshly in every, land and in every age in history, in every place and in every time throughout human, since the Jews existed. And being persecuted, it's a kind of pressure on the group that just makes the people by necessity be smart and have portable means of livelihood, right? So, my mother is a Holocaust survivor. She and her family left Hungary with nothing, got to Chile and did very well for themselves. My great-grandfather left Ukraine with nothing, got to Chile, did well for himself, and had a bunch of children who did well. And that emphasis on education and not only learning all these rules, but learning how to learn. I think there's nothing more valuable than learning how to learn, valuing learning, and an intact family unit, right? So making the family the most important thing, and family and community, it just adds so much strength to an individual to have a really strong family and community unit. And obviously the Jews are not alone in that, but it explains some of what we've been able to do. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's been great to learn with you, even though it's late. I honor you for being up late if you're on the East Coast or elsewhere. Tomorrow is a much more sane and doable time. Noon Pacific, with God's help. We'll continue with page 147. And there's some fascinating stuff there as